Hello, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Joe Bates, a young composer who's already making a fantastic impression on the new music scene. And he has written a piece called Some Parts of Us for SATB Choir with Divisions, which we're going to be publishing imminently. And it's a terrific work that I think choirs will find it very, very enjoyable to sing, beautifully calculated for voices and wonderfully rewarding texts and what have you. Now, Joe Bates, we came across Joe first off because of our association with the National Youth Choir of Great Britain. And Joe's been writing pieces as part of a fellowship with them. And Joe, welcome. It's fantastic to see you, and thank you for joining me. Tell us something about the genesis of Some Parts of Us.
So Some Parts of Us began when I was resident at the Red House in Aldborough with National Youth Choir. And I was working on another piece. I was working on my piece Now Is a Long Time for them. And I was kind of fiddling around at the piano with chord progressions, really, with kind of groups of 2 triad chord progressions. And this 8-note progression came out that is the real core of this piece. You know, this piece is really based around just 8 triads. And from that, the song kind of got built out.
I think that comes across because it's one of those ones where it's quite easy to see, but also to hear the logic in the piece is how it develops, and that's one of the most attractive features about it, I think. But also the words are particularly intriguing, and perhaps you can again tell us something about where those came from.
Yeah, the words here, they're about the way that our friendships change over time, and particularly the way that we move on from friendships. The piece is dedicated to a current friend of mine, a friendship I have not left behind, but it was something that we've been talking about, and so it was very fresh on my hand and quite fresh on my mind in lockdown as well. You know, the friendships that were no longer close. And so the piece was a kind of, I don't think a regretful rumination on that, because these things aren't always negative, but contemplating some of those questions.
Yes, I think you mentioned lockdown, but for me, it doesn't feel necessarily like a lockdown piece, because I think the topics you touch on are relevant at any time, and it is a reflection on about how friendships develop and change and alter. That's not assuming for the worse or for the better or whatever. It's just a fact of life that's the case. But you also have a very, I think, wide and diverse range of literature that you call on. I noticed that, you know, this might be from your own words, which you wrote this time, or I see, for example, you actually did a piece recently based on the Julian of Norwich from the 14th century, and indeed used some words of Wallace Stevens as an inspiration for an orchestral piece recently. You've got a very, very wide taste in literature.
Yeah, so I have a very, very particular relationship with words as poetry versus words as lyric. And it's something that I think about a lot in my work. And as a result, I generally write my own words if I'm setting text. The reason for that is I feel that lyrics and poetry have a very different sound to me, and a very different density of image. So I think that poetry can often struggle when being sung, particularly when being sung kind of at pace, you know, in a way where the text really moves by, because the density of images is just too great for the listener to follow it at that pace. And so my inspiration is often great songwriters rather than great poets for writing lyric. So for me, you know, kind of Sondheim, Fiona Apple, Father John Misty, Leonard Cohen, these are the kind of songwriters that come to mind as people who can use just one or two perfect images that fit the melodic line and sit with you, rather than zooming by in the way that poetry can so often do.
Yes, I think certainly in some parts of us, one thing comes across strongly to me is that, I mean, perhaps because it is something that, you know, your own words that you're setting here, is just the level of conviction in them. It's a piece that, you know, really does have many changes of the sort of of the dramatic intensity. It seems from the soft to the wider end of the spectrum, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. And you it's, of course, it's by definition you're owning the words because you wrote them, but I think that's something that gives you a head start on that. It's wonderful. If we're talking about the sort of about the musical influences in terms of your harmonic view of the world, as it were, where would you say some of those come from?
So this, I mean, there's a very specific thing here, which is Bartok. And it's probably not something that comes across on the surface level, I don't think. I don't think the bar-to-bar harmonies here sound particularly Bartok-y. But the specific way that these chords work is they go round a diminished seventh chord. So you move from, you know, through those key centers. And that's something I play with a lot in a lot of my music. And it's very much inspired not just by Bartok, but by a specific analysis of Bartok by Erno Lenvai, who was very interested in the way that tritones worked. And one of the things that I really like about it is that it allows you to move using very conventional chords into very unconventional places. And so I find it very expressive tonal use.
Yes, I think, again, that's something that comes across brilliantly in the piece for me, because, you know, in one level, if you actually take that apart, it sounds quite complex. But actually, if you think of the piece harmonically as a singer, rather than necessarily trying to read each interval, what you actually find, that sequence of patterns, means it's a piece that is very, I'm not going to say it's entirely simple, because it's not, but I mean, I think basically once you've got that harmonic structure and you can hear it in your mind, it then becomes easy to sing it, and the logic works really well. I think that's fantastic. I noticed that with some of your pieces, you're inspired to use electronics and such features as the detuning or retuning of instruments and things like that. I should say, this is not one of those pieces, but I'd be fascinated to know a little bit more about how and why you incorporate those techniques in some of your works.
I would say that tuning is really kind of central to my thinking for the last few years, and the way that kind of thinking about tuning outside of our standard tunings has helped me reapproach mode and tonality, has been really valuable. I think it's given me a lot of new resources, even when I'm writing without it. And I have found that the process of simplification that I've been through in the last year has really stemmed from my much more kind of gnarly and challenging quarter tone writing, and that there's a real through thread between that and this, between thinking of, you know, if you've got to think about what the material demands, as you do very carefully when you're working with alternative tunings, how do I then begin to apply that to perhaps a simpler pattern like the one involved in this piece? So this piece was very much part of me thinking, okay, I love electronics, I love using extended tunings. How do I keep my sense of my own voice, but not use them in this context?
I think the fact that you use such things judiciously and often with a light touch, I think actually makes it much more effective than if it's sometimes you hear it sort of rather heavy-handed and invasive element. But no, I think that from what I've heard of your other music, even outside the choral repertoire, I think it's beautifully judged and beautifully balanced. I commend you on it, if I may. It's great. Joe, I feel I could talk and ask you questions forever, but I won't on this occasion. We'll have a second episode at some point, perhaps. But just to conclude, we're very excited at Stainer and Bell about the launch of Some Parts of Us, as part of our Choral Now series, and also very, very proud that it's another staging post in our collaboration with the National Youth Choir of Great Britain. And it's been lovely to see the piece, being in preparation over the last year or so. I just urge people to look on our website, where full details will be announced shortly. And we wish you well with your forthcoming plans. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.